to start off with our newsmaker, Congressman Mike Pompeo. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Tim. Thank you for having me on the show.
You guys don't have much going on. We were just talking about that a bit before the show in Washington these few weeks. Just kind of a lazy, laxity.
Lots of work. two weeks left in the month of September. Lots of things that need to get accomplished.
Crazy times, isn't it? It's just nonstop.
It is.
Let's talk about Syria. That's I think that's what's on everyone's mind right now, and we are a war-weary public right now, and this is a tough one because, Mike, I think your position is a little different from many of your colleagues, and this is a challenge for you.
It is different. I start from the fundamental proposition that America has absolutely critical national interest in what's going on in the Middle East. It's much bigger than what's going on just in Syria. We've got radical Islamic jihadists that are beginning to thrive there, and they want nothing more than to come to Kansas and kill us. We've got the Ayatollahs in Iran who are in control of the Assad regime today. And you've got the influence of Russia, who's not been a friend of America for as long as I've been alive. I'm a Cold Warrior. I was in the Army during the Cold War. And so we've got important interests there. And I know folks are tired and they wish it would go away. Nobody wishes it would go away as much as someone who's a former soldier. I want nothing that's going to put any of these young men or women at risk. Bad news is the president's wrong. He says Al-Qaeda is on the run. It's just flat out not true. Yeah. Al-Qaeda is not on the run. They want to do harm to us. And so America needs to remain engaged, do all that we can to shape the outcome there so that when the Assad regime falls, which it ultimately will, the folks who come to power in that region are not folks that are in control of Iran and Russia, but rather are folks who have been working with America and other Western allies. And so there's less risk to us in the homeland. That's the reason I care so much about this issue, and I think it's very important that we stay engaged.
I think I read earlier this week that the CIA has already started delivering weapons to the rebels. And, there is some question there as to really who are the rebels? Are these folks we want to help? Are these folks that are we going to be out of the frying pan into the fire on this situation? How do we know, Mike?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. It's a great question. And it's complicated. It's a really rough neighborhood, yeah. To be sure. But I just returned from the Middle East. Had a chance to talk with our soldiers and sailors and airmen over there, our national security folks, and those of our allies as well. And it is possible to identify the radical Islamist extremists, the folks who are out there today killing Christian minorities, doing real harm, and growing their power base in Syria, much like you had in the Fatah region in Pakistan for so many years. And so there are folks that are better than others. And it's important that we try and identify them. We'll get it wrong sometimes, sure. To be sure. But it's important that we engage as best we can, because I can tell you this, we are going to be a lot happier with a rebel victory that's connected to America than we are with a rebel victory that's connected to Iran and Hezbollah. That would be really bad for us here.
The concern is, if we do decide to take some type of military action against Syria, the concern is boots on the ground. I mean, that's what everybody says, and I think the pledge is that we're not going to do that. How can we be sure that that doesn't happen?
Yeah, I can say this. If we do nothing, there will come a day that we'll have boots on the ground. We saw it when we did nothing as a result of the Khobar Towers bombings. We've seen it before. When radical jihadists attack America and we do nothing, ultimately that comes back to haunt us in America, and we end up with large numbers of forces in places that we just wish we didn't have to send our kids. And so the reason you act now, the reason that America needs to stay engaged now, is to avoid exactly that risk. You can never be sure. Military action is always uncertain. But if you're asking what's the best way to minimize the risk that we ever have to have significant forces on the ground inside of Syria. We already have a lot of forces in the Middle East today. We've got the 5th Fleet in Bahrain. We've got folks all over. But if you want to maximize the likelihood that we never have to go in and take care of a huge American problem inside of Syria, the way to do that is engage early, engage consistently, engage without putting thousands of folks on the ground. We don't need boots on the ground to accomplish what I'm hoping we can do. And we reduce the risk that we ever have to face that dilemma.
I was listening to Senator John McCain the other day, and he was mentioning that if we have a concrete tactical plan that doesn't involve sending people, actually ground forces in, that can be done by airstrikes, missiles, drones, that kind of thing, he believes that we can pull this off, but it's going to be a pretty significant effort still, possibly more than what the president is asking for. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I've been deeply critical of the president's proposal. And I had the chance to go over to the White House earlier this week and express my frustration with their tactical plan. We had a very direct discussion. It was the president's chief of staff I spoke with. He seemed like a nice enough man, but we had deeply different views of how this plan ought to be executed. Right? What our challenge has been before is that we give up too soon. The radical Islamic jihadists are in this for the long haul, and I understand we're democracy. It's hard to sustain these efforts, but I can tell you a shot across the bow or 2 or 3 day exercise doesn't begin to match the threat. And so I don't know exactly what Senator McCain has been proposing, but I can say that it's got to be something that you're committed to. It's got to be something that you're willing to stay in for as long as the war continues, and that war continues until they give up or there's a surrender flag. And I don't see either of those for an awfully long time against this threat from radical Islamic terrorism. And so I hope the president will come up with this strategic view of the Middle East more broadly. How do we do this? And he'll acknowledge that the Israelis very much want us to engage there. It's important to them. A lot of my colleagues who often say they're very supportive of Israel have walked away from this. Yep. Folks on the Republican side of the aisle, they say, I'm pro-Israel, and yet it's Israel that Israel is among the nations that thinks we should act, and they've walked away from it. They've thrown up their hands, I think in part because they don't trust this president to execute this properly. I get that. I've been very critical of President Obama on many fronts too. But this isn't about politics. This is about keeping Americans safe.
We've heard from the president that 60 to 90 day time frame. Can we really pull this off in 60 to 90 days?
Well, it depends what you mean. Again, you have to just go. It depends what you mean by this. Can we pull this off? If you mean, can you take down the Assad regime or degrade the Assad regime in 60 or 90 days significantly? Yeah, you could probably do that. But that's only just a piece of what has to be the ultimate set of criteria, right? This isn't about some other country. This isn't about Saudi Arabia or Jordan or our ally in Turkey or our ally in Israel. This is about America. And to protect American national interests, this is going to take a commitment over not weeks or months, as you hear in 60 or 90 days. This is going to take a sustained commitment over the long term. We still have folks in South Korea. We still have soldiers, lots of places, many years after the primary conflict is ended. If we do this right at the beginning, we can avoid having these enormous troop commitments in hostile places around the world. And if that's what I'm urging this president to do. It's what I've been advocating for since the beginning of this becoming the hot topic of the day.
You mentioned the president. This has been a tough sell for him, tough sell for you. How do you sell this, not only to your fellow congressmen, senators, but to the public? Yeah, the public overwhelmingly is against this.
I've seen data that's all over the place, to be honest with you. I saw someone had a poll today that some member of Congress that asserted they had 99%, and the data was very different from that when the actual poll came out. Yeah. And so I've seen data that's all over the place. We receive calls in my office and say, Mike, you're not being aggressive enough. You need to bomb everything that Assad has ever touched in his life. And so what you have to do as a leader is you have to step away from the politics. You have to identify what matters to America, and then you have to go try and advocate for that every place. The White House, among your colleagues on Capitol Hill, and certainly explain to your constituents why it is this matters and why the policy that you're advocating for makes sense for them and for their families. And we have so many kids in the military here in South Central Kansas. Why it matters to the parents who have their sons and daughters who are in service today. That's what this is about. Those kids will be the ones that get the first call. If we walk away from Syria and the Middle East, their kids will be the ones that get the first call to go fight this when it's much worse.
We've heard in the past few days about the potential of maybe a diplomatic solution to this, potentially involving Russia. I think there's a lot of skepticism there. I don't know if you share that. I would guess you probably do. Give us your thoughts there.
Well, it looks like that was kind of a last minute, just before the congressional vote, grab for a straw. But I hope it works. Taking these chemical weapons out of Bashar al-Assad's hands would be an amazingly good outcome, but the execution is incredibly difficult. Yeah. A couple hundred tons of weapons in a number of places within Syria, just to execute that in the context of lots of fighting and Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra Front doing battle there, radical Islamic jihadists that are going to want to take on these UN folks that will ultimately be called upon to take out that task. But having said that, I hope they'll continue to pursue it. It'd be great if we could reach that outcome without having to fire a shot or put American at risk. But I'm not optimistic that'll lead to the outcome that I think we all hope and pray will actually occur.
And timing will be a big issue here as well, because if we pursue that avenue, that's going to take a lot of time, and that time is not on our side in this whole situation.
You know, time isn't on our side. The president waited 2 years too long. 2 years ago, had we supported some folks that were friendly to us inside of Syria, you would not have the Syrian, the SILF, the Syrian Iranian Islamic Liberation Front. You wouldn't have these groups built to the enormous extent that they are today. You wouldn't have had Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, have free reign inside of Syria as he does today. So I think that is true. Each day that goes by, the global jihadis continue to expand their power. And if you're a Druze or a Christian minority inside of Syria today, every day that goes by, the risk increases.
Let's talk a little bit about the role of America. You know, this is one of those things where I think when people start talking about situations like this, there are two things at play. First of all, the safety of America, but also the role of America just on the globe. You know, if we don't take a stand on something like this, on these horrible human rights violations, who does? And I kind of want to get your thoughts on that. Is that worth going to war over? I mean, obviously to protect the country it is, but on the other side of it, is that worth going to war over?
Yeah, you know, Tim, it's a fair question. You'll note that all the things I identified as America's interested, I did not mention the enforcement of international chemical weapons norms one time. And I've seen the videos, as have many of the folks who'll be watching your show today. They're horrific. But that alone, from my perspective, would not be the causes that would send us off to go do this. It's horrific. There are many things that could be done to deal with that and punish Assad, but that alone for me isn't enough. I come back to American national interest every time. I come back to what's going to keep us safe. Those are the things that cause me to say that's worth our engagement. You don't need 20,000 folks. We've got lots of ways to project American power, and that's what I've been talking about. Frankly, for 7 months since I came on the Intel Committee, I've seen this challenge rising, and have been talking to administration officials since that time, trying to get them to begin to engage early so we don't end up in a really bad place 2 or 5 or 10 years from now.
One of the criticisms I've heard of President Obama in this situation, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is the sales job of this whole thing. And that's kind of a crass way to put it, but you do have to sell the public. You have to sell fellow politicians, and some people say that he hasn't done a very good job of that. Is that a fair criticism?
Oh, absolutely. And when I say that, this isn't about sales. This is about understanding, being willing to articulate the reasons properly. The president, even in his speech on Tuesday night, said we have to go to war, and then in the second half of the speech said, but not now. He's incredibly conflicted. This is the president who swore he was going to get us out of wars, right? He came in, he campaigned. You remember this last campaign. Sure. Detroit is alive and Osama bin Laden is dead. Well, we know about Detroit, and I can assure you that while Osama bin Laden is dead, Al-Qaeda is not on the run. He meant that we had destroyed the risk from Al-Qaeda. He's just, he wants this to go away very much, and that causes him not to be able to be a commander-in-chief that can articulate this vision of the way to protect American national security interests in a way that someone was as committed and prepared to do that would be. That's the challenge I think he's faced. He himself is not comfortable making the case that these radical global jihadists are still there, still out there presenting risk to America, and here's why we ought to do it. He's used this hook of this chemical weapons norm as his only linchpin, and then he says, well, we're going to have an unbelievably small attack. And that is not only not possible, it's a really bad foreign and military policy.
Before we go to break, what happens next? We're looking at the diplomatic angle, but we talked about time being a huge factor here. What happens next from your standpoint? How do you motivate your fellow members of Congress, senators? How do you motivate them to do what you think needs to be done here?
You know, it's been interesting. Even in this last week or week and a half, even some of those folks who initially came out and were unsupportive of what the president was doing have really started to look at it. They've received briefings, not just on the chemical attacks, but on all the risks that are taking place in the broader Middle East. Have noted over that time, they're starting to understand that their initial statement, which was, hey, let's do nothing, is not possible. We're doing something. Yep. We're out there today, we're engaged in the world, and this idea of we're not going to join the war isn't possible because the war is with us. And I think they're starting to recognize that. So I think sometimes it takes an education process, not only for members of Congress, but I think the American public also, and they deserve a commander-in-chief who will tell it to them straight, and I hope the president will do that.
Great. Mike, we're going to take a commercial break, but stay with us.